Hello, friends. This is Adam Shoemaker, Rector at St. Stephen's Episcopal Church in downtown Charleston, back for another edition of Rector's Corner. And I'm very happy to have with me today Father Guerric Heckel, the director of the St. Francis Retreat Center at nearby Mepkin Abbey. Thank you, Father Guerric, for making the time to sit with me today. And I've asked Father Guerric to come on because we typically release these conversations the first Wednesday of every month, and we are recording prior to the election, but when this gets released, it will be the day after the election. And so I want to talk, Father Guerric, a little bit about how we stay grounded in anxious times, because I think it's likely that when this interview is released, we will still not know the outcome of the election. And even if it looks like it's becoming clear, I think there is still a lot of anxiety for the days and weeks to come. So that's my first wondering for you. I wonder if you could reflect a little bit with us about how we might stay grounded during anxious and uncertain times.
Well, I don't have any magic answer to eliminate anxiety, but I think it's going to be anxiety regardless of how the election turns out. But to stay grounded, I find that what's important for me to stay grounded is to have a contemplative practice, or at least a robust prayer practice that I engage in every day. That's where I find my grounding. And so, what has been interesting for me is that recently, whenever I finish my, contemplative prayer, I always kind of click on to Google News, and the reason I do that is that I want to say, what is it that I'm called to pray for today? Now, I respect those whose contemplative practice is to fast from news media. But for me, if I at least don't check into the news, I don't know what to pray for. So as I finish my contemplative practice each morning, I try to say, now, where is the body of Christ suffering today that I need to lift up in prayer? Where are the people of God, so divided today that calls me to prayer, to kind of lift these situations in our world up in prayer? And then when we go to Eucharist, I invite the other brothers in the community to pray for these intentions at Eucharist. I've found also that in addition to that, I've been expanding my range a bit. For example, I found myself when I was praying for the people who survived and lost loved ones in the hurricane in northern, North Carolina. Not only did I find myself praying for the people, but I found myself also praying for the land that was so devastated and the environment that was so devastated by this hurricane. I've also been known to pray. Sometimes we have Eucharist. Of course, we're right on the Cooper River, and during duck season, we hear all these shots going off as we're trying to celebrate Eucharist. So I've been occasionally prayed for the ducks who are surrendering their life, with the hope that they're offering their life to feed others and not just for the sport of it. I'm looking forward to the Feast of All Souls, and one of my petitions that day will be, I want to pray that Lord have mercy on all of the plant and animals that have gone extinct and those whose extinction is threatened today. So I find that by being grounded, this contemplative practice invites a much deeper connection with all of life. And so that's one way I find that I can find myself to be kind of grounded in the midst of all the chaos and division that's going on around me.
Well, you mentioned the phrase contemplative prayer, and I think that leads me to ask you to unpack that a little bit. I mean, obviously, Father Guerric, you live in a monastery setting. Most of the people who are listening are leading very busy lives. And I wonder if you can reflect on what your prayer practices are and how those who are listening in might be able to carve out a balance between contemplation and action. I mean, I certainly believe I preached a sermon on that not long ago that we're called, all of us, to be contemplatives in action. But how might we go about doing that?
Okay. Well, I usually begin by saying nobody's life is so busy that they can't find at least 10 minutes just to be silent each day. It may be, not checking the news quite as much as I usually do or emails. Find 10 minutes at least where I'm going to make an effort just to be silent.
Mhm.
And I think one of the most helpful ways I find that people are able to do that is through the practice of centering prayer, of just making the intention of to being in God's presence, to be quiet and still in that presence, and developing a prayer word. Some people are suggest just one syllable: rest, peace, whatever. So anytime a thought tries to steal me out of being in that presence, I just very gently recite that prayer word with the hope that the thought will pass by. So my sense is the more and for the 10 minutes, I just might be just letting go of one thought after another, not experiencing much, a spiritual buzz at all. But what I'm doing is I'm beginning to let go of those things that trigger the anxiety, that trigger the anger, etc. And so as I go through the day, then chances are I'm going to be a little more kind, a little more gentle because I've spent this time, in trying to engage in contemplative prayer. So, there are three types of prayer, verbal, vocal prayer. That's the prayer that we were taught as kids. There's the prayers we do when we gather together to worship. Then there's mental prayer. That's thinking about God. And then there's contemplative prayer. So contemplative prayer is wordless, thoughtless prayer. So in the first time we're talking to God in verbal vocal prayer, we are thinking about God in mental prayer. And in contemplative prayer, we're just being with God. So anything that helps us just to be quiet and to be still and to be silent, I think is contemplative prayer. So also, I think, noticing is a form of contemplative prayer. So when I listen to the news and try to notice where there's suffering in the world, and I try in my contemplative prayer just to feel some of the suffering that's going on in our world, some of the anxiety. And I think the very fact that I'm sensitive to wanting to feel that is in itself a prayer.
Mm.
Now, in terms of contemplation and action, I don't think we do a period of contemplation and then burst into a period of activity. I think the two have to be interwoven. The early Christians really did not see a distinction at all between contemplation and action. So one way of looking at it is that our action brings us into contemplating. And as we contemplate, then that brings about a new vision. And that new vision continues to foster good relationships. So I think that's the whole point is, as much respect as I have for people that really do devote their lives to the whole, social justice, etc. Sometimes, though, what happens is just point to the change that needs to take place that is not the change. So I think that the change has to be change that comes from our relationships with one another. That's where change takes place. And so I think the contemplative practice helps us to feel more connected and to develop deeper relationships with people. And that's where change, I think, begins to happen.
Well, that is a wonderful segue to my next question. We are swimming, I think, in a pretty disembodied kind of public square these days, with so much engagement that people have on a regular basis with social media, and that does remove us sometimes from actual incarnational relationship building. But I do think that in this polarized time in which we live, there is some fear about engaging in real time with people because of the extreme differences. I've had parishioners come to me in recent weeks to confess their struggles with interacting with family members and friends who are supporting the other candidate in this presidential election. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about um, how we best remain open to our neighbors across lines of difference in this election season and always.
Yeah. That takes me back to 2016 when a retreatant came here by the name of Victoria Chance from Greenville. And it was a couple months after the election, and we were sitting around the table in the conference center here. And actually, one of your parishioners was part of this conversation, Joan Pittman.
Mm.
So Victoria said, after the election in 2016, I realized I had to do something. So what I did is I created a deck of cards, and on these cards, I put questions that did not have a particular, political bias to them, questions like, have you ever experienced prejudice in your life? What have you learned about death or whatever from your family? And put these questions. And so then I would call people together for a meal and with a real diverse gathering of people of different persuasions. And so I would put the deck of cards out and ask a person to draw a card and answer the question on the card. No crosstalk. Then when they finished answering the question, they'd pass it to the next person. The person would answer the question given to them. No crosstalk. She said, well, what I discovered at the end of the meal, these people from various diverse persuasions found a common ground to be able to talk to one another about what's important in life. So she's gone on to develop that in a way that is just, she's going all over the country now, talking about my neighbor's voice. So she has this wonderful kind of, they can see that she says that this is what her little pack of cards looks like. So you pull out the cards and you pick up a card. For example, this is one on our work. It says, tell us a story about a time when you changed directions of something that impacted other people at work. How'd it go? Or, pick another one. Here's one on our society. Players have 3 minutes to answer this question. Listen, I got the wrong card there. But she says some amazing things here's sacred thought. In what ways do your religious or spiritual beliefs offer you social advantage or disadvantage? So those are some of the questions, and they have a little timer. So you just have 3 minutes to answer the question and move on. And so she's finding that this has been a wonderful way, even in a parish congregation, to enable people to have deeper conversation with one another and to build community and to kind of relieve some of the tense and tensions that up with people. So I think she sent St. Stephen a complimentary set of cards. So that might be something that might be you might find helpful in your own congregation. The other thing I mentioned, this came to me as a suggestion. We're having an elder retreat, and one of the participants said her mother, who was in an assisted living facility, was just totally distraught when she would go to supper and have supper with these residents, and all they would do would complain about their ailments or whatever. So she said there was just no substantial conversation at all at the dinner table. So what I would do is I would read the news, etc., and pick out a couple of questions and bring to the table and ask these questions, you know. And so that began to create some lively conversation. So I'm wondering, as people prepare for Thanksgiving dinner, if they might just bring some questions to the table that don't have that political, grab to them. For example, I'd like to talk about this wonderful movie I just saw, or this interesting person I met on the way home on the play, to get a different type of conversation going that might be very engaging as a way of kind of talking, transcending some of the political divide.
Hmm. I love that, and it certainly connects with our Christian tradition of table fellowship, breaking
Right.
bread with one another, and finding the presence of Christ in our neighbors, and working for common ground. I've often, as an aside, thought that in this digital age in which we live, where people are now so connected to their devices, that the church really has to offer this space where people can come from different backgrounds, different ages and generations and perspectives, to find common ground and to build relationship, and to actually build life-giving community with one another in real time. That's becoming a really precious commodity that people are missing in their lives.
Well, not only that, but people from diverse backgrounds have so much to contribute to our even understanding of our own belief system. Yeah.
Well, Guerric, I also wanted to ask you, um, because we are people of the resurrection, because we are Easter people, um, where you find hope or solace in the midst of challenging, anxious, and uncertain times. It was interesting when I was thinking about the kind of questions I wanted to ask you. I was trying to imagine how I will feel the day after the election, and I wonder what you would say to that. Where do you find hope in difficult times?
I find hope in people that I love or people that love me. That's
Mm,
where I find hope.
mm,
And so I find hope anytime I'm in a gathering of people where people become more vulnerable. I think
mm,
there's where the relationships begin to build. That's where we begin to find support, to struggle together with what lies ahead of us, where we're able to put something out of ourselves that needs support and to ask for help from other people. And I think it's almost a time to go back and listen to those Negro spirituals again, in terms of those people found a way of maintaining hope in terrible situations. So I think that any way we can facilitate people, having more than just a superficial conversation with one another, there's hope.
mm, mhm. Yeah, the importance of vulnerability with one another, being honest with one another, connecting at a heart level, is really precious, and something that I value a great deal as well. Well, Guerric, as we come towards the end of this short conversation, since we have you, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about Mepkin Abbey and a little bit about the resource that Mepkin provides for people in our area.
Well, I think one of the contributions we as a monastic community can provide for the larger community is a safe place for people to come home to their own hearts, where they're going to be free of things that distract them in another way, and in a space that supports their they're being able to go to a deeper level within themselves. So sometimes I say all we have to do is open the gate, that the property itself, the beautiful nature that surrounds us here feeds the soul.
Hmm.
Now, in addition to that, we offer at the retreat center, a variety of opportunities for people. Some people prefer just to come for a silent retreat and just maintain silence. And they're sometimes overwhelmed at what can really happen when a person is really silent. And then to have the opportunity to pray with the monks 7 times a day, that has been uh, a very supportive thing for a lot of people. But then we try to offer some programs as well that we think are contributing to the church and society. For example, we just finished a wonderful grief retreat this past weekend. We have another retreat coming up this month on the mystics. We do retreats on centering prayer, and we have contemplative ecology. We have a contemplative ecology retreat. The first weekend of May, we're doing a retreat on the wisdom of trees. And so we find that some of these group retreats, people who have never met one another before, in a very short space become kind of very deeply connected with one another. So I think that it's just we're kind of providing a kind of an oasis for people, a place where they can come, where they're not hassled, where they can really kind of come home to their true self. And I think the fact that we're a living community that holds this space, provides a container for people to deal with some of the anxiety in their life.
Hmm. Well, and I assume Mepkin has a website and that's where people can find all the information that they need.
Yeah, mepicanabbey.org, Yeah.
Terrific, terrific. Well, and for St. Stephenites who are listening into this conversation, upcoming as we move towards the Advent season is the annual Mepkin Creche Festival that we typically send a group to take a glimpse of creche sets from all around the world. We'll be putting information about that in our newsletter. But thank you so very much, Father Guerric, for taking the time to have this conversation about how we can remain prayerful and hopeful together in these times. Thank you for your community and the gift that your community provides. Please hold us at St. Stephen's in prayer, and we will do the same for your community as well.
Right. And as when this get published, we'll hold one another prayer as we say, what happened, why, and what now? Okay.
Amen. Well,
Blessings.
thank you, and thank you for those who've been listening. I'll be back next month for another edition of Rector's Corner. In the meantime, friends, you stay safe, well, and you keep the faith. Take care, everybody.